Morning. Thank you for joining us. Governor Cooper proclaimed November 2022 as American Indian Heritage Month. American Indian Heritage Month honors the culture, history, and achievement of American Indians in the United States for their many contributions to American society. Our guest speaker will be Dr. Lawrence Locklear, Director of the Office of Student Inclusion and Diversity at UNC Pembroke. He will highlight the institution's remarkable history and defining moments and its historical mission of service to the Lumbee and other American Indian peoples. Before we go further in today's program, I would like to do some housekeeping. As always, keep your microphones on mute throughout the entire session. Please send all your questions to the chat room. The chat room will be monitored and we will look to make sure all of your questions are answered in an orderly fashion. This session will be recorded and you will be able to view this program later on demand. Speaking of on-demand recordings, you will be notified soon of this program's availability and all of our recent programs when they are ready to be viewed. We are pleased to announce the following upcoming program. Transgender Awareness Week will be on November the 16th. We look forward to seeing you there. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Dr. Lawrence T. Locklear. He is the Director of the Office of Student Inclusion and Diversity and Adjunct Faculty in American Indian Studies at UNC Pembroke, an enrolled citizen of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. Dr. Locklear's research interests include Lumbee history and culture, American Indians in higher education, and the history of UNC Pembroke. In 2014, he co-authored Hail to UNCP, a 125-year history of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. His essay, Down with the Old Lumbee, an investigation into the origin and use of the word Lumbee prior to 1952, was published in the 2010 issue of Native South Journal. In 2007, Dr. Locklear appeared in the History Channel's Aftershock Beyond the Civil War, where he provided historical commentary about Lumbee hero Henry Berry Lowry, his multiracial gang, and their fight for social and political justice in Robeson County between 1864 and 1865. He earned a PhD in educational studies with a concentration in higher education and a minor in educational research methodology from UNC Greensboro, a master's in public administration and a BA in Indian studies from both UNC Pembroke, and a BA in history from North Carolina State University. The next voice you will hear will be the voice of our speaker, Dr. Lawrence Locklear. We are excited to have you here today, Dr. Locklear. I'm going to turn the program over to you in just a moment so that you are able to advance your slides. Dr. Locklear?
Hey there. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the University of North Carolina Pembroke and how we're a leader in American Indian higher education. So thank you again for this opportunity. So again, thank you. I'm like I said, I'm very excited to be joining you for American Indian Heritage Month and speaking about UNC Pembroke. So today, during today's discussion, there's a couple things we're going to cover. One, I want to share with you UNC Pembroke's land acknowledgement, and then we're going to talk about UNCP today, a little bit about the Lumbee tribe, and then we're going to get into the establishment of UNC Pembroke, defining events, peoples, and traditions, and then I'm going to share with you some ways that UNCP is being a leader in American Indian higher education. And then last, we'll open the floor up for any questions that you might have. So what a land acknowledgement is that it recognizes the land on which institutions reside, and also recognizes the original inhabitants of that land. And so UNCP's land acknowledgement reads this way. North Carolina is home to 8 federally or state recognized tribes. Those include the Kahari, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Halawa-Saponi, Lumbee, Maharan, Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, Saponi, and Waccamaw-Siouan. The University of North Carolina at Pembroke respectfully acknowledges that the lands within and surrounding present-day Robeson County are the traditional homelands and gathering places of many indigenous peoples, notably the Lumbee. We share an ongoing responsibility to safeguard these lands and to respect the sovereignty of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. UNC Pembroke honors all indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging, who have been and remain an integral part of the history and culture of this region. So with reading the land acknowledgement, it's important to note where UNC Pembroke is situated today. UNCP is located in Robeson County in southeastern North Carolina. The counties of Robeson, Cumberland, Hoke, and Scotland are the ancestral homelands of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. There are more than 55,000 enrolled citizens in the Lumbee tribe. We actually take our name from the main waterway that runs through Robeson County, the Lumbee River. And today, Pembroke, North Carolina, where UNCP is located, is the cultural, political, and economic heart of the Lumbee tribe. And when talking about UNCP today, UNCP is known for quite a few things. One is its historical mission of service to the Lumbee tribe. In 2005, the state of North Carolina designated UNCP as North Carolina's historically American Indian University. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a few minutes about that historical mission of service. UNCP is also known for its personal learning in a small campus setting. We have over 7,600 students. Classes are really small with a faculty to student ratio of 1 to 20, but also we have 41 undergraduate and 18 graduate programs. Our students are very engaged and very service-minded. We have athletic programs that are doing really well at NCAA Division II, but also we're known for having among the most diverse student bodies in the southeastern United States. In fact, U.S. News and World Report recently recognized UNCP as among the most ethnically diverse universities in the South. Another thing that draws folks to UNCP that really distinguishes it from others is that we are one of the most affordable schools in the state of North Carolina. In fact, we're an NC Promise campus. What an NC Promise campus is in-state students pay $500 a semester in tuition. That does not include fees, that's just tuition, which makes our price of attendance comparable to many community colleges in the region. So folks are drawn to Pembroke for that. But as you can see, there are a number of things that distinguish UNC Pembroke from other institutions. And so when we talk about UNC Pembroke, let's go back before its founding in 1887 to when the seeds for the university were planted in the Lumbee community. And that period we're talking about is the end of the Civil War. The Civil War occurred in the United States between 1861 and 1865. By 1865, it was a starving period in the South. There was not much food available. Anything that was being grown on the farm was taken by Union and Confederate soldiers. So people were starving and people were desperate. In Robeson County, that was the same. It was very true here. But also one additional layer added to that, the struggle faced by people here was that American Indian men were being conscripted and sent to Fort Fisher to work on the fort. The Confederate Army was forcefully taking American Indian men and sending them to this malaria-infested area and requiring them at gunpoint to work on and maintain this fort. As a result, many of these Lumbee men would escape and come back to Robeson County, and when they would hide out in the swamps. Eventually, a group of these men that included brothers Henry Berry Lowry, Steve Lowry, Thomas Lowry, and their first cousins Calvin and Henderson Oxnine, created a gang that would ultimately include former enslaved African Americans as well as whites. They originally started raiding wealthy plantation owners for food, but eventually their fight became a war against social injustice and white supremacy in Robeson County. And it became known as the Lowry War, and the Lowry War lasted from about 1864 to 1875. It was a pretty bloody and violent time in Robeson County's history. A number of notable folks were murdered, including the sheriff of Robeson County. but it was an effort by particularly Indians to assert themselves and their existence here in Robeson County. At an inquest to one of the events that happened in the county was Hamilton McMillan. He was a white attorney from Red Springs, which is right north of Pembroke. And the events and discussions that occurred during the Lowry War really inspired Hamilton McMillan to start learning more about American Indians here in Robeson County. So he spent the rest of his life studying American Indians here in the county and in the region. And so fast forward by the 1880s, Indian people here in the county believed that having an educational system that Lumbees controlled was necessary for maintaining their survival as a distinct community, because they knew that if we had a school system that we controlled, we would be a way to provide Indian children with better choices. And so Hamilton McMillan, that I mentioned earlier, in 1885, he got elected to the North Carolina General Assembly. And after speaking with Indian people in the county, he introduced legislation that did a couple things for American Indians here. One, it gave us the name Croatan, because McMillan theorized, notice I say theorized, this was a theory he had, that Indians here were descendants of John White's Lost Colony and coastal American Indians who intermarried and migrated and settled inland to Robeson County. The problem with his theory is that there's no oral culture and no oral history and no material culture to support that, but because he was in a political position, he was able to give that name to Indians of Robeson County. But also, this bill provided state recognition for Indians here in the county. And more importantly, it established separate schools that would be administered by Indians, which meant that Indian committee leaders got to select teachers of their own choice. And so this was really important for American Indians in Robeson County. Well, as time progressed, Indians said, well, if we're going to have our own Indian schools, we need Indian teachers to teach in those schools. So again, Indian leaders reached out to Hamilton McMillan. And this time, in 1887, he introduced legislation to establish a normal school for training Lumbee teachers in Robeson County. And so on March 7th, 1887, that legislation was enacted and Croatan Normal School was established. And Croatan Normal School was the forerunner to UNC Pembroke. And so the initial purpose of the school was to train Lumbee people to be teachers, and that's it. And so one interesting note is that the same day that Croatan Normal School was established, NC State University was also established. But I think our bill was adopted first, so we say we're the third oldest school in the UNC system, and that's only behind Chapel Hill and Fayetteville State University. But in speaking in terms of the Croatan Normal School, the Normal School was, again, a teacher training institution, and they were very common throughout the United States. Now, for the school, for Croatan Normal, in order to attend, students had to be at least 15 years of age, and they must teach for 1 year in the Indian school system. Now, when the state established a school, they provided a $500 appropriation, but that appropriation could only be used for the salary of the first teacher. So when you look at this photo of the campus from 1888, you see the land the building sat on, the building itself. Monies had to be raised by the Indian community to purchase that land and to purchase the material and the labor that went into constructing that school. So as a result of that, the school didn't open until the spring of 1888. And when it did, it was located 1.5 miles west of the current location in what's known as the Pates community. And it opened with 1 teacher and 15 students. So campus was really small. Now, the first board of trustees that were selected for the institution were all American Indian. They were also all Lumbee with the exception of W.L. Moore. And W.L. Moore was from Bladen and Columbus County, and he was a member of the Waccamaw-Siouan Indian tribe. Moore came to Robeson County in the 1870s as a traveling Bible salesman, met Big Jim Oxenine, who was also on the first board of trustees, married Big Jim's first cousin, and settled in the Lumbee community. The thing that's unique about Moore, is that he was selected as the first teacher of the normal school when it opened. The reason for that was that he received normal school training in the 1870s at a school for African Americans in Lumberton, which is the next town over from Pembroke. So he was selected as the first teacher and principal. These other men that you see on the screen were very influential in the Lumbee community. They had the cultural and the political and the financial capital to convince folks to support the institution. The other thing that's really unique about them is that many of our students, faculty, staff, and alumni descend from these 7 original trustees. In fact, Isaac Brayboy is my great grandfather. So again, it's pretty common to find that blood connection to the founders of the institution. And so in 1888, the school opened at Pates, again, about a mile and a half west of campus. Things were pretty tough initially because the school didn't receive much funding from the state. It was very limited. Also, many of the students came from sharecropping families, which meant that between March and October, probably students were in the farm fields working, which means that education was secondary to bringing in the crops. So many students, unfortunately, could only attend school just a few months out of the year, and usually that was the coldest time of the year. By 1907, things had settled down at the school. The enrollment was growing, and the administration decided to add a girls' dormitory and a dining hall. Unfortunately, where they were located at Pates, there was no room to add those 2 buildings, so the decision was made to purchase land in Pembroke and move the school to Pembroke. Now, for those of you who know a little bit about the community, you may be wondering, well, why didn't they just build a school in Pembroke to begin with? Well, the reason they didn't is because the town of Pembroke didn't exist in 1888. The school itself is actually 8 years older than the town of Pembroke. So the town was established in 1895, and by 1907, the town had grown. There was a train depot, a few other things here. So there were a lot of amenities that the school could take advantage of. So in 1909, the school moved to Pembroke, to its current location. The photo that you see on the left is what our campus looked like in 1915. The photo on the right is campus just a few years later in 1924. In the photo on the right, the far right structure was the first building constructed on our present day campus. To the left, the building in the foreground was the girls' dormitory, and behind it was the dining hall. And of course, the building that's in the very middle is Old Main, which still exists today. So Old Main is the only one of the 4 structures that still remains on campus. So when we talk about our institution, the curriculum has evolved considerably over the years to match the state's requirements to be a teacher in the state of North Carolina. In 1888, when the school opened, to be a teacher in the state of North Carolina, you only had to have a 7th grade education. Yes, 7th grade education. So as a result, the coursework at Croatan Normal School was at the elementary school level because that's really all you had to have to be a teacher. Well, by 1912, state requirements had changed, and you had to have at least a high school diploma. And so we had our first high school graduate in 1912. By 1926, the state required that in order to be a teacher, you had to have a 2-year normal degree, and a normal degree was an associate's degree for those who wanted to teach. So in the 1920s, we had a junior college, a high school, and an elementary school on our campus. Well, eventually, the elementary school and the high school phased out as we added the 3rd year and 4th year of the bachelor's degrees. And finally, by 1939, we offered the first Bachelor of Arts. In the class of 40 that you see pictured on the screen, they were the first to graduate with a bachelor's degree from the university. And we started offering our first graduate programs in 1978. So again, you can see how the curriculum at the university evolved over time to match the state requirements to be a teacher. Also, the university's had a number of names over the years. In fact, we've had 7 different names. When the school opened, it was known as Croatan Normal. But by 1911, the word Croatan was shortened to Crow, and Indians were being called Crows by local whites, and Crow was the equivalent of the N-word. So Indian people asked that the name of the tribe be changed, and in 1911, it was changed to Indians of Robeson County. Well, the same piece of legislation that changed the name of the tribe also changed the name of the school. So it demonstrates how closely intertwined the school and the tribe were at the time. Well, 2 years later, Indian people said, well, Indians of Robeson County really doesn't describe who we are as a people. So again, Indians sought a new name. This time, Angus McLean, who was from Lumberton, he would become the governor of the state of North Carolina in the late 1920s. He proposed the name Cherokee Indians of Robeson County. His theory was that, notice I say theory again, his theory was that Cherokees from the western part of North Carolina fought during the Tuscarora War in 1711, and after the war was over, they settled in Robeson County. The problem with his theory is there's no oral history or material culture here to support that. But the people here were given the name Cherokee Indians of Robeson County, and again, the name of the school was changed to reflect that tribal name. Well, the Indian people kept the name Lumbee until 1952 when we held a tribal referendum and adopted the name Lumbee. The school kept the name Cherokee Normal until 1941 when the administration petitioned the state to have the name of the institution changed to Pembroke State College. Well, at the very last minute, the governor of the state stepped in and had the words "for Indians" added to the name of the school. Now, you got to remember, this is 1941. It was a segregated South. There were already colleges for white students. There were already colleges for black students. Now, folks would know Pembroke State College was the college for Indians. And if you were an American Indian in the state of North Carolina and you were seeking a 4-year degree, Pembroke State was probably your only option. We did have a few other Indians who attended other schools, but we'll talk about how they were able to do that in just a few minutes. But Pembroke State College was truly the college for Indians in the state. So again, that demonstrates that close connection between the university and American Indian peoples. In 1949, the name was shortened to Pembroke State College. In 1969, we became a university because we wanted to start offering graduate programs. And then in 1996, we became a university because, as our chancellor at the time said, folks were calling the admissions office and they were asking, where is Pembroke located? Is it a public school? Is it a private school? And so by changing the name to UNC Pembroke, it told folks we were located in North Carolina, we were a public school, and we were a part of the much larger UNC system. And so again, as I said earlier, Jim Crow segregation limited higher education opportunities for American Indians in North Carolina. As a result of that, between 1939 and 1953, UNCP was the only, now notice I say only, state-supported 4-year college for American Indians in all of the United States. And so even though Jim Crow segregation did prevent Indians from attending historically white institutions in the state, there were a number of Indians who did attend other schools. And we did have one graduate who was able to attend one of the PWIs in the state. Her name was Weta Lowry Bailey. She finished high school at Cherokee Normal in 1934. This is her pictured on the screen. And in the 1928 girls basketball team photo, she is the second player from the left. But Weta finished high school here in 34. She enrolled at Appalachian State University to take some summer classes. And I think the reason she did that was she was trying to build a transcript that distanced her from attending Cherokee Indian Normal High School, because she realized that if her transcript said that she was an Indian, she would not be able to attend school at a white institution. It's not that I don't think she was proud to be Indian. It's just she realized that in order to attend one of these institutions, she had to add some courses from other white institutions. So she attended Appalachian State, and she was able to attend classes that summer because she was able to pass. And what I mean by pass is that she was able to pass for white. She was light-skinned, and she was attending Appalachian State University, which is on the western part of the state. So if folks didn't know about Lumbees, then they wouldn't know that she was Indian. So that fall, she transferred to East Carolina University. Things were going really well until she had a chance encounter with a student from Robeson County. A student went back, told their parent. That parent reached out to the president of ECU. President of ECU then called the system office to find out what to do about this Indian at this white institution. The system office wanted to disenroll Weta immediately, but fortunately for Weta, the president at East Carolina decided to allow her to finish courses that semester. So she transferred out that fall and enrolled at Middle Tennessee State University, where she did graduate in 1937. I think part of the reason she did attend Middle Tennessee State was that in Tennessee, Lowry is a very common name, and I doubt many folks, if any, had heard of the Lumbee tribe. And so again, she was able to pass for white. So there were no questions about her identity and her being eligible to attend white institutions. But this was the same struggle that many Indians faced, particularly when they finished their high school diploma or their 2-year degree or their 3-year degree, and they wanted to further their education in the state of North Carolina. So again, I hope you see why Pembroke State College for Indians was so important, or UNC Pembroke was so important to Indians here in the state. And I will talk with you for just a few minutes about the development of intercollegiate athletics and some of our campus traditions at UNCP. In 1939, our very first gym was built on campus. The great thing about this was it provided a facility for hosting basketball games. Because prior to that time, other colleges did not come to Pembroke to play us in basketball. And so that fall, Wingate Junior College came to Pembroke, played us. I don't know who won the game, but I'm going to claim it and say that UNCP did. But this was the beginning of intercollegiate athletic programs. You'll see a picture on the screen are the men's and women's basketball teams from 1942. The other reason that I mentioned intercollegiate athletics is because American Indians were able to continue their athletic careers at Pembroke because they couldn't attend, again, other institutions in the state. So, again, the university provided a venue for Native athletes to continue pursuing their interest in basketball, football, baseball, and in other sports. One interesting point of pride for us is that Ida Tanayak O'Keefe, who taught at the university, was a sibling to Georgia O'Keeffe. And some of you may be familiar with Georgia O'Keeffe. Georgia was one of the world's most famous painters between the 30s and 40s until her death in 1986. Ida was an artist herself. She came to Pembroke in 1941, and she was the very first chair of our art department. She taught for 1 year at Pembroke and left in 1942 when World War II started. She went to California to work for McDonnell Aircraft Company. But when I was doing research for Hale to UNCP, I was able to reach out to one of Georgia and Ida's nieces who lived in Hawaii. She was in her 80s, and she told me some interesting stories about the sisters. One was that there was some type of rivalry that existed between the sisters. Georgia preferred to be the only sibling that used the O'Keefe name when selling her artwork. So a lot of times when older Ida sold her artwork, she used their mother's maiden name, Tanayak. The niece also told me that of the two sisters, Ida was the more interesting sister. She was the one that always had something fun and exciting going on. If you've seen many photos of Georgia, she has this very stoic and serious look on her face. And so she apparently was that way in real life. But it's interesting to know that Ida taught at Pembroke for 1 year in the early 1940s. In 1941, our first yearbook began publication, and it was titled Lumbee Tatler. The thing that's interesting about it is that students chose Lumbee as the title of the yearbook 11 years before the tribe chose it as the name of the tribe. The yearbook ceased publication in 1942 because of the start of World War II. Resources were tight, and so those resources had to be used in other ways on the campus. By 1944, our school colors were black and gold. I don't know exactly when and why those colors were chosen, but we were using those by 1944. After the end of World War II, a number of GIs returned to pursue their higher education at UNC Pembroke, as well as a number of other institutions throughout the United States, or they used the GI Bill. And so at Pembroke, the number of students enrolled grew tremendously in a very short period of time. As a result, the university decided to add an intercollegiate football team. Again, this provided an opportunity for American Indian men to continue their athletic careers. But this team, we only had it for 5 short seasons, and the two reasons being, one, football was expensive and the school just couldn't afford to support a team. But secondly, we had a hard time finding opponents to play because you got to remember, this was still an all-Indian school in the segregated South. But many of the men who you see in this photo from the 1946 team went on to be very successful and influential leaders and businessmen and educators in the Lumbee community. When the football team was adopted, the students and faculty said, well, you know, we need a nickname to describe ourselves, our athletic teams. And so they voted and they chose Braves. And so our school has been known as our athletic teams have been known as the Braves since 1946. And if you think about it, it makes complete sense to be called the Braves because at that time, it was still an all-Indian institution. And the term Braves to the students and faculty described the makeup of the student body. That fall, we also saw the beginning of the second yearbook, which was called the Indian Head, which is still in publication today. In 1947, our student newspaper, the Pine Needle, began publication. And another interesting point of pride for us relates to Bela Smalley. Bela Smalley came to Pembroke in 1951 to serve as our athletic director and coach for all of our teams. When he came to Pembroke, he was finishing up his playing career in the NBA. He was one of the stars of the early NBA where he played from 1946 to 1942. You'll see in one of the photos on the right that he's wearing a Baltimore Bullets jersey. That was the last team that he played for. But Belis is notable because he is credited with inventing the turnaround jump shot, or the turnaround jumper. You know, if you're playing basketball and you have your back to the rim and you turn, jump, and shoot all in the same motion, that's called a turnaround jump shot. Well, he's credited with inventing the turnaround jumper. He coached at Pembroke from 1951 to 1956. His teams that he coached finished about 500, so they did okay. But again, Belis, we were proud to have him as our AD and coach in the early 1950s. In 1954, Alma Mater, which is called Hail to UNCP, was written by Ira Pate Lauer and his wife Reba. Ira taught in the music department, Ira in the foreign languages department. And this tune is played considerably on campus because it is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful song. If you get a chance to listen to it, pull it up on the UNCP website. But, you know, we reference the lyrics to this song all the time, particularly Black and Gold Float On Forever, Symbol of Loyalty, Pembroke Alma Mater, Hail to UNCP. So we're really proud of this song. Now, by the early 50s, higher education and education in general was changing in the United States. And in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And what it did was it opened schools up to everyone regardless of race. When you talk about the integration of the student body at UNC Pembroke, we actually began the integration 2 years before that time. In the 1940s, the administration was having to justify to the state why we needed an all-Indian college, particularly when we only had about 100 students. So the administration recognized that in order to grow the enrollment, they had to open the enrollment up to non-Indians. So in 1942, Reverend Christian White became the first non-Indian student to enroll at UNC Pembroke. He actually, right before that time, came to Pembroke as the minister at Pembroke First Methodist Church. And then he transferred from UNC Wilmington to Pembroke State College. When he enrolled his, when he started attending UNCP, he enrolled his white kids in Indian schools. I think that instantly endeared him to the Indian community, because when he started attending Pembroke, he was well liked by the students and got along really well with the students. In fact, his senior year, he was voted a senior superlative. When he graduated in 1954 and marched across the stage, they paused the ceremony and they recognized him as the first non-Indian to graduate from the institution. After Christian enrolled, you started seeing more and more white students to enroll. Now, in 1953, the General Assembly approved opening the enrollment to whites, but only up to 40% of the student body. And then with the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, the schools opened up to everyone. Now, our first African-American students, though, didn't enroll until 1967. That year, Larry Barnes enrolled as a freshman, and Sylvia Baum Banks transferred in. That's why she graduated in 69. The reason that I think African-American students didn't enroll earlier at the university was because the public schools in Robeson County, many did not integrate until the late 1960s and early 1970s. And because the institution was so closely intertwined with the local community and the school system there, I think that was the reason that it didn't integrate. But when Larry and Sylvia did attend the institution, they really enjoyed the school, got along really well with everyone. They were on campus a few years ago, spoke really highly of their time here. Sylvia lived on campus. And she said her suite mates were of different races and different ages. She said everyone got along really well. She said, in fact, one of her suite mates was in her 60s and coming to college for the first time to work on a bachelor's degree. Larry's mom worked on campus, and so he had local ties to the community. And so, again, I'm hoping that we'll be able to bring them back to campus now that hopefully we're going to be moving into a post-COVID environment. But with the integration of the campus, it led to rapid growth in our student enrollment. And so between 1956 and 1962, our enrollment grew from 151 students to 758 students. And one of the main reasons for that was President Walter Gale started recruiting out-of-state students, because he recognized that out-of-state students could come to Pembroke and pay out-of-state tuition that was far more affordable than in-state tuition where they were living. So when we look at our Indian Head yearbook from the time, you'll see a lot of students from South Carolina, Virginia, New York, New Jersey, Delaware coming to Pembroke. And for many of them, they were athletes also. So again, their out-of-state tuition at Pembroke was more affordable than in-state tuition where they were living. And so in 1962, enrollment continued to grow. That year, Dr. English Jones was selected to serve as president and then chancellor of the institution. He served until 1979, and the enrollment grew from 758 to 2,300 students. Dr. Jones was also the very first Lumbee to serve as president and then chancellor of the institution. In 1972, Pembroke State University joined the UNC system, and that was the year that all public four-year state-supported institutions in the state joined the system. Some institutions were already members, others were not, but we joined the UNC system that year. The 1970s also proved to be a pretty influential period in the university's history because by 1970s, Lumbee people were really excited about the growth that was occurring in the school, but we were concerned about the so-called de-Indianization of campus because Indians in the early 50s were the only ethnic group on campus, and by the 1970s, they were in the minority, and the Indian community was concerned about the loss of connection between the Indian community and the campus. And all of that came to a head with the Old Main building. Old Main was constructed in 1923. And when it opened, it had a 700-seat auditorium. Old Main hosted classes, speakers, movies, commencement, and funerals. And so for a number of reasons, Old Main became a sacred space to a lot of different folks. But by 1970, the building had fallen into disrepair. It was termite infested. And so the university made plans to raise the building and build a new auditorium in its location, same location. Part of the reason for that plan was the university was landlocked and didn't really have additional land to build a new auditorium on. So they decided to tear down Old Main and build the new auditorium in its place. Well, the Indian community found out about these plans and started protesting. And they did that because of a perceived cultural loss between the university and the tribal community. You can see the photo on the left, folks were protesting at the Board of Trustees meeting. Photo on the right, a number of folks marched through the streets of Pembroke saying, "Stop, don't tear down Old Main," because they understood the cultural and historical significance of the building. In fact, a number of national leaders became aware of this effort. One of those was Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. She was the very first African-American woman to be elected to the U.S. Congress, and this was in the late 1960s. In 1972, she became the first African-American to run for president of the United States on a major party ticket. That year, she sought the Democratic nomination. And on the left is a photo of her standing on the steps of Old Main when she came to Pembroke to campaign for president. During a talk, she urged the Indian community to keep fighting to save the building. Well, fortunately, 2 short months later, the university was able to acquire some property on what was then the north end of campus and decided to build the new auditorium there. And as a result, they decided to spare Old Main. So efforts started to raise money for building a new, for renovating Old Main. But unfortunately, on a Sunday morning in March of 1973, Old Main was destroyed by a fire. And you may be wondering, why was this building, why did this happen? Well, there's a side story associated with that. Old Main was not occupied at the time. And in the Indian community in the United States, there was something going on called the Red Power movement. It was a cultural, political renaissance that was changing the Indian community. It occurred in 1960s, 1970s, where there was a radical element in the Red Power movement called AIM, or the American Indian Movement. And so there were AIM members that were moving to Pembroke around this time, and they were there were other fires that were being set around town to raise attention, to draw attention to their platform. Well, the night that Old Main burned, there was also another fire in Pembroke. And so there was someone arrested but not charged with burning the building. In fact, no one was arrested for burning the building. In fact, I think the person that burned the building was not from Pembroke. I think someone from Pembroke would have recognized the cultural significance of the building and would therefore not have burned it. But you can see the day of the fire, the community folks came out and watched this 50-year-old campus and community landmark burn. In fact, a number of our students actually helped put out the fire once it was started. When the fire was over, the building was completely destroyed, and Governor James Holshouser flew to Pembroke that day, and he and the chancellor stood on the steps of the building and vowed to find money to help restore the building. And so Old Main sat empty for a couple of years because of efforts to find money to restore it. In 1976, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Fortunately, monies were located in the late 1970s, and in 1978, Old Main was restored and reopened in 1979. In the area where the where the auditorium was located was repurposed as the Museum of the Southeast American Indian. By the early 1990s, the university adopted a new mascot and official athletic logo. The new mascot was a red-tailed hawk, which is indigenous to Robeson County. And then the new athletic logo featured the red-tailed hawk and our school colors. Now, when you look at this athletic logo, I want you to think about it in a different kind of way. Think about it being more than just an athletic logo. It also reflects the relationship between the university and the American Indian community. Native peoples teach that animals are sent as spirit guides or helpers to humans, that animals are here to help out. So when you look at the athletic logo, you see that the red-tailed hawk is positioned with the brave to make sure the brave is successful. I always tell faculty and staff that we take on the role of the red-tailed hawk, and it's our job to make sure that our students are successful and that they graduate. So not only does this logo represent that relationship between faculty, staff, and students, it represents the relationship between the university and the tribal institution. And in 2005, when the NCAA was investigating the use of native imagery and native mascots by universities, this logo was endorsed by the Lumbee tribe and supported by the Lumbee tribe. So we were one of the few institutions that was able to keep our native athletic logos and nicknames. In 1999, UNC Pembroke was designated a focused growth institution by the UNC system. As a result, we became the fastest growing university in the UNC system. Our enrollment went from 2,900 students to 6,900 students in 10 years. And you can quickly see just by glancing at the two maps on the screen how much our campus grew in that 10-year period of time. And I see that someone asked the question about the railroad being so close to the university. I think it was so close to the university because when the university started we moved to Pembroke in 1909, it was in the best interest for everyone to be close to the railroad because that was one of the primary means for transportation and movement. And so, yes, West Residence Hall is today known as Oxidine Administration Building. And I've heard many folks say that it could get very loud. In fact, the building I'm in, Old Main, is right next to the railroad track, and the building shakes when the train goes by. So, yes, Brian, I completely understand about it being loud and the building shaking. And so in 2005, UNCP was designated as North Carolina's historically American Indian University by the North Carolina General Assembly. And this recognized the institution's historical mission of service to the Lumbee and other American Indian peoples. And so now with the last few slides, I want to just talk with you briefly about how UNCP is being a leader in American Indian higher education. When you talk about the school and its impact on the Lumbee community, you need to understand that UNCP was a mechanism that knitted Lumbee communities together. It gave us a place that we could be proud of. It enhanced our sense of identity because this was a school that was started for Native Americans. And so it resulted in us becoming a more self-reliant, self-determined people. Also, it provided an opportunity for formal higher education because I mentioned earlier, many Indians could not attend historically white institutions in the state up until the 1950s. It also contributed to the creation of a Lumbee middle class because prior to the establishment of the school, Lumbee peoples were farmers. And, you know, farming could be unpredictable. If it was a dry season, your crops didn't do well. And so now Lumbee people could take on jobs as teachers, which provided secure income, a retirement, and benefits such as health insurance. So this created or resulted in the establishment of a Lumbee middle class. Also provided Lumbees with a venue for establishing relationships with the federal and state governments. But also Lumbee peoples, we look at the institution today and we still describe it today as our institution. And so, again, there's a sense of cultural ownership that persists between the Indian community and the university, even though it is a state institution today. And so when we talk about the school, enrollment is 7,600 students, and of those, about 12% are American Indian. This large number of Native students puts UNCP in the top 10 nationally in terms of institutions with largest Native student enrollment. And if you look at public four-year institutions, it actually puts us, if I remember correctly, in the top 5 of institutions in the United States, top 5 or 6, because UNCP confers more degrees to natives than any other institution east of the Mississippi River. And so as a result of the large Native student enrollment, we are a federally designated Native American serving non-tribal institution, which means there are federal funds that the institution is eligible for because of that designation. Also, when you look at UNCP today, one thing that's really distinct about us is that 13 of our campus buildings are named for American Indians. If you look at other institutions across the United States, it's pretty rare to even find one building that's named for an American Indian on a college campus. But here at Pembroke, we have 13. And they're not all just Lumbees either. We have Lumbees, we have Wakamasuan, we have Cree peoples that buildings are named for. In fact, our main administration building where the chancellor's office is located is named Lumbee Hall after the Lumbee people. So I want to talk with you for a few minutes about our chancellor and some other ways that we're being a leader for American Indians in higher education. Our chancellor or chief executive of UNC Pembroke is Dr. Robin Gary Cummings. He's an enrolled citizen of the Lumbee tribe. He is a retired heart surgeon. He is the third Lumbee to serve as head of the institution. Dr. English Jones served in the 60s and 70s. Dr. Joseph B. Oxenine was chancellor from 89 to 99. And Dr. Cummings has been our chancellor since 2015. So we're really excited to have him lead the institution. In the early 1970s, Dr. Adolph Dow, who taught history on campus, instituted the Department of American Indian Studies. The thing that's unique about our AIS department is this is the only standalone AIS department in the Southeast United States. And as a result of that, we offer a Bachelor of Arts, a minor, and concentration in American Indian Studies. So students can come here and get a bachelor's degree in Native Studies. We also have the Dr. Adolph L. Dow Endowed Professorship in American Indian Studies. And the endowment is $1.8 million, and it is the largest type of endowment of that type in the United States. We've also had a number of distinguished speakers come to the university over the years. Those include Winona LaDuke, Joy Harjo, Wes Studi, Tommy Orange, Martin Sansemeyer, Adam Beach, Billy Mills, and Sherman Alexie. In fact, tomorrow night, we're going to be hosting Sterling Harjo and Tatanka Means on campus. And if any of you have been following Reservation Dogs, it's a new comedy about the American Indian community. And Sterling is a writer and producer, and Tatanka is an actor in the series. And they're going to both be on campus tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in the Thomas Building. So admission is free. So I encourage you to come join us for that event. The Department of American Indian Studies has also hosted the Southeast Indian Studies Conference. It is the only conference of its type to focus on Southeastern Native peoples. And so one of the questions raised is, what about collaboration with other colleges and universities serving significant numbers of indigenous students? That is something that we are working to improve. By being a Native American serving non-tribal institution, we have collaborated with other institutions. We've worked with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to provide internships for Native students at other Native institutions. And so that is something that we are working to improve at UNCP. In terms of our American Indian Heritage Center. This was established in 2020, and it's named for Kurt and Catherine Locklear. It's located on the second floor of Old Main, and its purpose is to provide cultural, social, and academic programs for Native students, as well as educational programming for non-Native faculty and staff and students. While we here want to share and promote the history of the university, we also want to find ways to educate non-natives about the Native community. And one thing that was recently implemented at the university is the ICC, or the Indigenous Cultures and Community requirement. And what it is that new students who enrolled this fall, you have to take at least 2 courses in American Indian Studies to learn about the American Indian community. Because we want folks to be knowledgeable about the university's history, but also the community in which the university resides. And so that is one way to build that connection between the Native and non-Native students at UNCP. And some things that the American Indian Heritage Center does is that we do have an American Indian Welcome Back Social, which is open to all students. We have an American Indian graduation at the end of each semester. October is University recognizes Indigenous Peoples Day, and we have a celebration around that day. We also celebrate Native American Heritage Month. In March, we host the Brave Nation Powwow and Gathering, which is the largest college powwow in the state of North Carolina. So I encourage you to attend. If I remember correctly, it's going to be March 18th. So definitely come join us there. We have over 2,000 people usually attend our powwow, so it's very much well attended. We also have a number of Native student organizations. We have Native American sorority chapters for the Native American sororities of Alpha Pi Omega and Sigma Omicron Epsilon. We also have an American Indian and Science and Engineering Society, as well as a Native American student organization. UNCP also is where Phi Sigma Nu fraternity was established, and Phi Sigma Nu is the oldest and largest American Indian fraternity in the United States, and it was established at UNCP in 1996. So we're very proud of that. And these organizations give all of our students, and not just our Indian students, an opportunity to learn more about the Native community, but also to engage with Native students. In Old Main, where the auditorium was located, the Museum of the Southeast American Indian opened in 1979 when the building was restored. The great thing about the museum is that it provides visitors with an opportunity to learn more about the vibrant cultures and rich histories of Native peoples of the Southeastern United States. So you can come and learn more about Huckleberry Lowry and the Lowry War. You can learn more about the Lumbee victory over the KKK in 1958, but also you can see what life was like for Lumbee people in the 18th century. So I encourage you to visit the museum. It's open Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. We also have the Southeast American Indian Studies program, and our goal for it is to become a standalone school for Southeast American Indian Studies, like our School for Graduate Studies, School of Education. And the purpose of the Southeast American Indian Studies program is to position UNC Pembroke to be the leading institution for the education of American Indians in the Southeastern United States. And so over the years, since the establishment of SAIS, we've partnered with the Lumbee tribe to secure federal grants to provide the Project Access, Project 3C, and Project Indigenous Choice programs. We've also worked with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to provide a 2-week summer camp for American Indian high school students from across the United States. And so that's usually held during July. UNCP has had a number of notable Native alumni. One of those is Tom Oxenine, who finished in 48. He was the first American Indian to be a pilot in the United States Navy, and he finished from Pembroke State College in 1948. For those of you who enjoy eating at Cracker Barrel, Jack Lowry, who's a 58 graduate of the institution, was part of the executive board that started Cracker Barrel. He was also their attorney for 30 years. Donna Chavis is a community activist in the Lumbee community. Right now, she's working on water rights for Indian people. Kelvin Sampson is the head men's basketball coach at the University of Houston. They made it to the men's Final Four 2 seasons ago and have done really well since he returned to the institution. John Lowry is the current chair of the Lumbee tribe. In fact, a number of the chairs of the Lumbee tribe have been graduates of UNC Pembroke. And so I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about UNCP, I co-authored Hail UNCP in 2014 and recounts the first 125 years of the university's history. If you're interested in learning more, you can purchase a copy from uncpress.org. Of course, the university owns the copyright to Hail UNCP, and I don't see any royalties from the sale of the book. But if you're interested in learning more about UNCP's history, I encourage you to purchase a copy of this text. And so now I'll open up the chat for any questions. As you can see, UNCP has a very rich history. We also have a historical mission of service to Lumbee and other Native peoples. I know my presentation focused largely on Lumbees, but many of our graduates who were Lumbee went on to teach and become the first teachers in other American Indian communities in the state of North Carolina. So we have a close relationship to many of the tribes in North Carolina as well as throughout the southeastern United States. So I'll open the floor up now for questions.
Yes, Dr. Locklear has opened the floor for questions. So at this point, if you do have any questions, feel free to submit them to the chat. We did have one question that was submitted while you were presenting, Dr. Locklear, and I believe you saw it because you answered the question pretty much spot on. And it was about what the university does to instill a connection to the rich heritage that's there, and how do you keep that connection between the students and the community? And you answered that question within your presentation. But I did receive another question, and it was about, let's see, there's someone had a question about the importance of the railroad being so close to the university. They wanted to know about the significance of that because they stayed in a building called West, and they found it to be at times kind of loud, especially around 3 o'clock in the morning. But they wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. When the institution started, railroads were the life ways for communities, and that's how the town of Pembroke actually got started, because we were situated along a railroad. And so it made sense to have the university located right next to the railroad. Now, unfortunately for our students who lived on campus and students who were commuting and trying to get across the railroad track and get to campus on time, the railroad in some ways did become a barrier to the community. But yeah, there was no way getting around the railroad, because that's how the town got started, and the campus was right near that. But fortunately now many of our residence halls are moving away from the railroad track to the northern end of campus, because the railroad runs along the southern edge of campus. So now students don't have to worry as much about the railroad as they did in the past, because like the person that posted, West Hall was very close to the railroad. So yes, so I completely understand the struggles there with the railroad at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yes, and I do have another question from the chat. Is there any relationship between the actress Catherine Oxendine, who played on the TV show Dallas, and the Lumbee tribe?
I don't know. That's a great question, but I will say this. If someone has the name Locklear or Oxenine, I would say 99.999999999% of the time there is some type of connection to the Lumbee community, because those names all originate in the Lumbee community. I don't know the connection, but I would say that there is a connection there somehow, some way.
Okay. And the next question, Lumbee tribal members serve in the military at a higher rate than other community members. Why do you think that's so?
Well, that's pretty common across Indian country and Indian communities. When you think about, traditionally speaking, Native communities, warriors played an integral part of the community. They served to protect the community. And so I think that's part of the reason why so many Natives and even Lumbees joined the military. But also you got to remember, um, Lumbee people joined the military as a way to escape the segregation and racism that existed here in Robson County. Many didn't want to become farmers, and so for a number of decades, really the only other option outside of farming was teaching and joining the military. And so a lot of folks didn't want to teach and didn't want to farm. The only option was to join the military. So I think that also contributed to a large number of Lumbees joining the military.
Okay, there are a lot of questions rolling in now because your presentation was it was fascinating. Let's see here. What are your thoughts about the Cherokee and Lumbee connection that you mentioned? It was thought Cherokees migrated here after the war.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any. Well, I hate to say never because you never know with some things, but there's not a connection, blood connection between the Cherokee and Lumbee, because if you know anything about North Carolina's geography, we're on opposite ends of the state. We came from different language families, had different cultural practices. So I don't think there's that connection there. But that was a theory that was created to support giving the name Cherokee to the Lumbee. And so, like the Croatan name and the Cherokee name, these were theories, but there was no oral history, no material culture to support it. So, but a lot of folks subscribed to those theories and argued for a number of decades that yes, we were related to Cherokees when in fact we were not. But that was a theory, again, that was developed to support us getting that name.
What about the collaboration with other colleges and universities serving significant numbers of indigenous students?
Yeah, so one that serves a significant number is Robinson Community College. I think majority of their students there are American Indian. They're also a Native American serving non-tribal institution like UNCP, and so we're working with NASNT institutions, other schools in the system, as well as to find ways to engage and better serve those communities. So we're also hoping in the future maybe we can build relationships with tribal colleges and universities that have large numbers of Native students, because we want to give our students opportunities to raise their awareness and engage with Native communities. And we think this is a great way to do that.
And again, we're going to go back to something we discussed a little bit a couple of questions ago, but someone was always been curious about the name Locklear, where it comes from and why the name is so common in the Lumbee community.
That's a great question. I get that one all the time. For those of you who are old enough to remember phone books, I know it's like a relic now, considering I rarely ever see a phone book. But when we had phone books here in Robinson County, you could open a phone book and literally flip for pages and pages and pages and pages of Locklears. Locklear, I don't know the exact origins of the name, but I do believe that it is the corruption of an English or French surname that was brought to the Americas. And the reason it's so common, I think, in the Lumbee community is that Lumbees had large families. Having my dad's family, there were 11 kids. Each of my grandparents, they had like 11, 12, 13 head of kids. So imagine if you have 12 children and then those 12 have 12 and then those 12 have 12 and they're all Locklears, that's going to result in there being a lot of Locklears in the Indian community. So Locklear, Oxenine, Lowry, Hunt, Jacobs, those are all very common Lumbee surnames that again came with Europeans. It could have easily come in through, there were Europeans who would trade with Indian communities, and the way that they would get into those Indian communities is they would marry, they would take a spouse from that Indian community, and that would give them access to that Indian community to trade. And so I think when that happened, they passed that surname along to their kids, and then if their kids started having a lot of kids, and that's how you saw this proliferation of the Locklear name among the Lumbee people. And it's also interesting, depending on what tribe you're talking about, many tribes have very common surnames also. It's like when you talk about the Hallowasaponi people in the northeastern part of the state, and you talk about the Richardsons, the Lynches, and the Evans, those are very common surnames there. When you look at the Wakamasuan, they have common names like Jacobs. And so other tribes have, based on that surname, you can almost somewhat identify what tribal community they came from. But if you're a Locklear and Oxnine, definitely have connections to the Lumbee community in some way.
Dr. Locklear, can you speak to the status of the federal recognition for Lumbee people or the tribe?
Sure, that's a great question, and I could probably talk for hours on that one. But so Lumbee people have been seeking federal recognition since 1888. And what federal recognition is it entitles us to certain benefits from the federal government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In 1956, Lumbees did receive federal recognition from the federal government, but at the same time, that Lumbee Act also terminated our relationship with the federal government, meaning The federal government recognized us by name, but in the same bill, they said you can't receive services from the federal government. So since that time, we've been seeking full federal recognition. And what that means is we would have access to the same rights and privileges that other federally recognized tribes have. And so in 2021, a bill was introduced in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House to strike the language from the 1956 Act that prevented us from receiving benefits as a tribal community. And so the bill was passed by the U.S. House, and now it's over on the Senate side, and we're waiting for a vote on the Senate side. The problem with the way things work in Congress, if you don't get a bill through before the session ends, you have to start over. So, and that's a 2-year session. So that session ends here in a month or so. And so if the bill doesn't pass the Senate side, then come January, we start the process all over again. And the bill would need to be reintroduced in the House and the Senate. In 1991, interestingly enough, we were 2 votes away from getting full federal recognition. The bill had passed the House side and got over on the Senate side, and we were 2 votes shy of getting federally recognized at that time. So we've been very, very, very close to getting that full federal recognition before.
Now, I know you worked on the book with UNCP that you were talking about. Are you currently working on any research or literary collaborations?
I am not. I finished my PhD in 2019, and so the 5 years before that were spent working exclusively on that. And my dissertation research focused on the engagement of Lumbee commuter students at a Native American serving non-tribal institution. So as soon as I finished that up, COVID came along, and so I haven't had a chance to really jump back into research like I want to. But speaking in terms of UNCP history and Lumbee history, there's a number of things that I do want to do some research on. It's just a matter of finding the time to do it.
Got lots of questions in here today. Let's see, make sure I'm getting all of the questions here. Now, is there a unique dialect for Lumbee,
Yes,
for the Lumbee community?
there's a very unique dialect. In fact, I code switched during today's presentation. Some of you may have heard my dialects probably slip in and out a few times, but the Lumbee dialect of English is very distinct. It's so distinct that citizens of Robeson County and Lumbee people can pick a Lumbee out of a crowd of people just by hearing them talk. And the reason it's so distinct is that when Lumbee people adopted English centuries ago, that form of English was maintained in our community, and so it didn't evolve and grow as quickly as English outside of the community. So there were some old words and some phrases, some things that we say, and also the way that we say it that is very unique to Lumbee. We lost our traditional language over a century ago, but the dialect of English sort of takes on the same purpose because there's things that we say and ways that we say it that communicate the same thing as a tribal language. And so you can hear the dialect more in older Lumbee people than you can younger Lumbee people, but a lot of Lumbee folks I know will code switch depending on what situation they're in. So if there were a group of Lumbees talking, we could easily step into that dialect, and it would be very noticeable. So, excuse me, specifically for those who've been to Pembroke and attended school here or know the community, the dialect is very, very distinct.
And I know you talked about the schools in the past in the area, in the elementary and middle schools. Are there any Indian related or American Indian related schools now since integration, or have those types of schools disappeared in your community?
That's a great question. So, Robeson County, even though our schools are integrated, Robeson County is still segregated in a lot of ways. A lot of the communities are still segregated by race. And that's just based on where people choose to live. Like the American Indian community is found mainly around Pembroke, north and south of Pembroke, and a few other communities outside of that. And because of that, the schools that serve those communities are still largely American Indian. Even the churches where people attend is largely American Indian. The high school I went to in Pembroke is Pernambuco High School. We had about 1,200 students, and of those students, about 90% were American Indian. And so, if I remember correctly, it may be the largest American Indian, predominantly Indian high school in the eastern part of the United States. And so, again, the schools that serve those communities are still predominantly American Indian, but you are beginning to see more and more schools be integrated, more fully integrated, just because folks are more mobile now and they're moving around to different parts of the community.
Now, it sounds like you were either a second or third generation UNC P student. How did that influence your decision to attend UNCP?
So actually, I'm a first generation college student. I was raised by my grandparents who could not read or write, but my grandfather was a general contractor in the Lumbee community, one of the better known contractors. Even though he couldn't read or write, he could build a house that was far and above any that others could build in the community. But I actually received my undergraduate degree at NC State. And the reason I chose initially not to attend Pembroke really had nothing to do with Pembroke. I just kind of wanted to see what was going on outside the Lumbee community and outside of Robeson County. I had attended school with the same people for 13 years. I just kind of want to see what else was going on out there. But I started work at UNCP in 1999. And while I was here, I decided to pursue a master's degree as well as the bachelor's degree in American Indian Studies because I had always wanted to learn more about my American Indian heritage and history. And UNCP had that program, and it just seemed like a natural fit for me to do that. And so, yeah, so I was very excited to have those degrees from UNC Pembroke.
And I apologize. I thought you had someone. You said someone was like a founder in your family.
Oh yeah, so
Was
Isaac Brayboy was my great grandfather, and he was one of the first. He was on the first board of trustees here.
okay, board of trustees.
Hmm.
Good, good.
Great question, though.
Are there any other questions that we have in the chat? I'm checking now. And to everyone today, I would just like to say thank you. You've given excellent questions today and have been participating fully with this program, as you always do. But we've gotten lots of questions coming in today. And I think it's because this program has just been so interesting. What other things are going on on your campus right now to help celebrate American Indian Heritage Month?
Oh my goodness gracious! There's a the American Indian Heritage Center that I mentioned to you earlier is planning a whole list of events for the month. Many of our student organizations are hosting events. Also, they're hosting events to raise awareness around missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's a hot topic in the Indian community. We're providing opportunities to learn more about our Native student organizations on campus. Like I said, tomorrow night we're bringing Sterling Harjo and Tataka Means to campus, who are Native American actors and producers, to talk about their work with reservation dogs. So there's lots going on during American Indian Heritage Month. But the thing that I do with my office at UNC Pembroke is we celebrate all of our diverse communities year round here at UNC Pembroke. So particularly like with American Indians, we just don't celebrate the American Indian community in November. We have events throughout the year. And the same thing applies to all of our other communities, the African American, LGBTQ, Hispanic, women. We do programming for those folks throughout the year, but we do provide signature events during the awareness periods that recognize those communities. And so Pembroke is just so diverse that we don't silo our efforts in some ways. We just celebrate those communities year round. And I would encourage everybody to come to Pembroke's campus. A lot of times I hear folks say that when they come to Pembroke, they're pleasantly surprised because they do know Pembroke is a small school, but once they get here and see the campus, see how beautiful it is, and really visit and get to know our students and attend some of our events, they're really impressed with the university. So definitely come out, check out a football game. Football season's winding down. Take in a basketball game. Our basketball teams have done really well. I think both are picked to win conference championships. We have our powwow in the spring in March. there's a lot of great things to see and do at Pembroke. And so I encourage you to come visit us if you get a chance. And our wrestling team also, yes, wrestling does really well at Pembroke too. So we've got, like I say, we've done well historically in all of our athletic programs. Wrestling has been one of those also.
Getting some more questions here really quickly. Just bear with me here. Okay. They sent a question to you. But we have a couple of UNCP grads on here as well, and they're very excited about today's presentation. This program has really, I think, helped to raise the awareness of American Indian heritage on your campus. Of course, we know it's a historically American Indian school, but all the information that you were presenting today was just so interesting, because you could see how that the history of your school, it weaves into the community, and it still continues to do so. What are, let's see, I'm looking to see if there are any other questions.
And a shout out to all the Braves that are on the call with me today. So glad to see that so many of you are here.
Yes, we do have some Braves on the call. So they are very proud Braves and are here representing today. And if it looks like if we do not have any more questions, we're going to just take a moment to let you, if you would like to elaborate a little bit more on, you were talking about diversity and inclusion on your campus and about your office. Specifically, if you'd like to elaborate a little bit more about what your office does and how you service both the campus and the community, we'd be interested to learn about that, because here we are a part of the collective HR community within the Office of the Office of State Human Resources. We work with EEO officers and HR personnel across the state. So we want to hear from your perspective what you do and how we can help better raise awareness among our employees.
Sure, yeah, most definitely. So, so with the Office of Student Inclusion and Diversity, our major goal here is to create a campus climate that is inclusive, where our students feel like they belong at the university. UNCP has been recognized for a very long time about its diversity. We are the most diverse institution in the state. When we look at our student diversity numbers, about 40% of our students are white, 30% are African American, 12% are Native, about 7% are Hispanic. And so campus is very diverse. We also have a large LGBTQ plus community on campus. So with my office, I want to make sure that everyone feels included on our campus. And the way that we achieve that is we host programming that recognizes all of these communities. But we also, through these programming, provide spaces and means for learning about these communities, because we focus on intercultural engagement here at UNCP. And what that means is providing everyone with the knowledge and skills to be able to navigate diverse communities, like things you should say, things you shouldn't say. And so you become more aware of that community. And so it's great being diverse, but at the same time, it presents challenges in the sense that you have so much diversity and trying to support all of those folks that it requires a lot of work, but we've been very intentional about it. And I think we're seeing the fruits of our labor, because again, when you come to our campus, there's no telling what type of cultural event is going to be going on campus, because like I said, we celebrate all of our diverse communities throughout the school year. And we do, and I'm sorry, let me tell you some more about my office. So the way that we do achieve all that is through programming. We provide education and training. We are also looking at hosting some critical conversations around hot topics. And so we're also, everything that we do here is student-led and student-centered, because working in the Division of Student Affairs, everything that we focus on is our students. So we're trying to use every opportunity to be developmental to help our students grow as professionals, and well as in personal ways too. And if you want to follow us, we're on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Our social media handle is Inclusive UNCP. That's Inclusive UNCP. And so we post all of our events and then information about all of our diverse communities on social media.
Again, Dr. Locklear, we were very pleased to have you today. I'm going to check with our panel to see if there were any other questions that may have been received that I did not see. Gina or Lisa, do you have any questions that you've received or have any questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Locklear?
I do not see any. I've been looking through. Um, Actually, a lot of my questions were already answered so, as I was coming up with them, but I'm sure I would probably think of some more. It's been a great presentation, very
Well, thank you,
informative, and
Lisa.
learned a lot.
And I was going to say, if any of you are ever on campus, look me up. I'm more than glad to show you around campus. Definitely come by my office. My office is located in Old Main, which is our oldest and most historic building. So definitely look me up if you come to campus.
Will do, for sure.
Right. Well, again, we want to thank you, Dr. Locklear, for being our presenter for this year's American Indian Heritage Month program. And I've learned so much today about UNCP and the programs and the rich history that you have there. And again, I would like to encourage everyone to get out and go to Pembroke to check out the university because it's lots to offer there and there's a lot to learn about the history of the Lumbee people and also the school and the town itself. So if you have an opportunity, I would strongly encourage you to get out and go to UNCP to celebrate not only during American Indian Heritage Month, but throughout the year. And on behalf of the state of North Carolina, Dr. Locklear, I would like to, the Office of State Human Resources, I would like to again thank you for coming and presenting today. And we will make sure that we get this program up for everyone to be able to view. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's program. We look forward to having you for our transgender awareness program on November the 16th. And this will conclude our program. Have a nice day.